Signals, the new supernatural thriller from F. Paul Wilson. Twilight has come, night will follow. It'll begin in the heavens and end in the earth, but before that, the rules will be broken. The change is coming, and the world as we know it is ending. 16-year-old Ellie has changed. She looks the same, but her mother detects someone else looking out through her blue eyes. Ellie builds a shelter in her room with an entrance that leads elsewhere. On one of the convoy of tractor-trailers, Harry Tate watches drive up a mountain road and return without the trailers, leaving nothing on the mountain. What are they shipping? And the writer, who finds a hole in the floor of his New York City apartment and tumbles through into elsewhere. They will all find each other and find their answers in the electromagnetic pulses piercing the earth from out there. Pulses that no one should hear, but some do. But they are not simply pulses. They are signals. Publishers Weekly says, with this chilling standalone prequel to Night World, F. Paul Wilson draws readers into the eerie universe of the adversary cycle. New readers and series fans alike will be swept away by this supernatural thriller. F. Paul Wilson's Signals, on sale now.
Excelsior, true believers! You are about to embark upon a journey, a trip to the 70s and 80s when mighty Marvel Comics ruled over all. The Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Champions, Deathlock, the Submariner, the Incredible Hulk, Killraven, the Son of Satan, the Macabre Man-Thing, and all your other Bronze Age favorites every week appearing on Defenders Dialogue. Now here are your guides, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene.
Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed. Good to be back with you, Chris. I am excited for this week's episode of Defenders Dialogue.
Brian, I can see you're excited because we're on video and you're naked.
The listeners don't need to know that. I am not naked, ladies and gentlemen. I have my shirt off because it's 152 degrees here in central Pennsylvania today.
I think that the viewers, hopefully they're not viewing, our listeners should send you one of those floor air conditioning units.
I have plenty of air conditioners. It's
you just like being hot and sweaty.
Well, I prefer being hot and sweaty over cold and shivering. But
are you setting the stage because we're in the Everglades, we're in the swamp in Man-Thing, and so you're setting the stage for yourself so you get yourself in the mood for Man-Thing?
You know, I'd like to say that's what I was doing, but really I was just accommodating Mary Sangiovanni's cat. His favorite thing to do in the world is to have the windows open so that he can holler at the birds and holler at the skunk who comes in our yard at night and occasionally holler at the deer. So she went to bed early last night, and I turned off the AC and opened all the windows for him. But when I woke up this morning, the house was like a microwave. So
there you go.
Yep.
All right, then.
All right. But yeah, I like your explanation better.
Well, I'm excited because even though we have a brief segue with Gerry Conway, we finally get into Steve Gerber this morning or today.
We do. Although I got to tell you, I think for Gerry Conway's early work, his early work at Marvel, keep in mind he was still a noob, if you will, when this was written. I think this is some of his best work right here. I think it shows the talent to come, the talent we are both aware of course, as adults.
Yeah, no question. That was definitely not a dig on Gerry Conway from my perspective. It was more of a compliment to Steve Gerber and how much I'm looking forward to covering Gerber. But yeah, this not only does Adventure into Fear number 10 with the Man-Thing feature the first regular appearance of the Man-Thing in his own title. It's only an 11-page story because there were 2 stories in that issue. But not only does it feature that, but it features Gerry Conway teaming up with Gray Morrow, who was the illustrator who did the very first Man-Thing story.
Yep, absolutely. Gray Morrow and Howard Chaykin helping out. Great, just a great team altogether. And we open with an interesting page, particularly for the time. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-panel grid, no dialogue, no caption boxes other than the credits. Just they let the art speak for themselves. And we see a bridge somewhere in the Florida Everglades. A car stops and a figure tosses a newborn baby off the bridge.
Pretty grim.
Grim as hell for the early 70s and for little Chris and little Brian. But the baby is saved by the clutches of the macabre Man-Thing.
Yeah, no, I had not read. Again, most of what we're going to be reading while we cover the Man-Thing are things I had not read. Yeah. And that's certainly one of them. And I read it and I was like, why didn't I read this comic when I was younger? This is like the kind of stuff I loved then. It's just really dark. Yep. I was born in 1967, so we were both born in 1967. I missed the Twilight Zone when it first was on, but its reruns were a huge influence on me. But you wouldn't get this on the Twilight Zone.
No.
I mean, you wouldn't get, it's in a comic book for kids, but on television, you would not get somebody pulling up on a bridge and throwing a living baby over the side of the bridge, over the railing.
No, you would not. So the Man-Thing rescues the baby. The baby is not afraid, which is very important because whatever knows fear, what happens to anything that knows fear, Chris?
It burns at the Man-Thing's touch.
That's right.
And thankfully, the baby is not afraid. And we get a flashback to the Man-Thing's origin. Once again, as you mentioned, our last episode, it's not quite clear whether or not Ted Sallis, after injecting himself with the formula that turned him into the Man-Thing, it's not clear whether he drove off because injecting himself caused him to lose control of the car, or if he did so purposely to commit suicide.
That's right. We get that origin recap. And it's also important to point out this early in the saga of the Man-Thing, his memories are still fluid. Sometimes for a moment, he can remember being Ted Sallis. He can remember, things like that. Other times, no memory whatsoever, just a creature driven by its empathic nature.
And I love this bit too. Slowly, mercifully, as gently as they began, the memories end. And the man who was once Ted Sallis, whose body has become that of a swamp creature, forgets again what once he knew. It's better that way. It's better. And I love that. Like, you think that, like, remembering would be good because he'll remember, he'll have motivation. He'll remember who he is. But clearly Conway is telling us that given what he is, it's better for him not to remember who he really is or what his past is.
Right. So the Man-Thing makes its way with the baby through the swamp, comes to the home of a doctor, Dr. Warren B. Thompson, has enough presence of mind to ring the doorbell and leave the baby on the doctor's doorstep. Yeah. We then get some interplay between the doctor and his wife. They recognize the baby. Why? They say, why, that's Billy Joe's little boy. What on earth? And the doctor says, it's that blasted husband of hers. I'm sure of it. He always hated the child. Once threatened he'd kill him if Billy Joe didn't give him up for adoption.
Yeah. Which is convenient that they are aware of this relationship because the Man-Thing overhears this. And even though Ted Sallis's memories are gone, the Man-Thing clearly has advanced intelligence. And hearing the story alone pisses him off.
Yep. It says now he understands. And like a kindled fire, that understanding begins to swell and gradually becomes hate.
And Brian, in the absence of him being able to host his own podcast in which he would call out such behavior, instead, he goes looking for Billy Joe and her husband.
Are you implying that that's what I should do, that I should end the horror show at Brian Keene and simply go looking for these miscreants?
No, I'm definitely not. I'm saying because he doesn't have a podcast in which he can out those miscreants and hand them over to the world's justice.
I don't know. I think charging through the swamp would be a lot more fun than recording the horror show. Maybe not as much fun as recording this show.
Given the temperature and relative humidity in your house right now, you're kind of doing that.
So we transition to a shadowed island rising from the moss and mud of one of the Everglades' many steaming lakes, or steaming living rooms, as is the case here in central Pennsylvania. And we meet the man who threw the baby over the bridge. His name is Hank Drummond. He's arguing with his wife, Billy Joe. He's telling her that the baby got sick and he took it to the doctor's house.
Now, I feel bad for our longtime friend, Hank Wagner, because it seems to me, and Hank listens to this show.
He does.
And Hank, if you're drifting off into slumberland to the sound of our dulcet tones, I apologize for this, but it seems to me that drunken spousal abusers in comics and television and movies, 90% of the time are called Hank. And what's up with that?
You know, that's
what's up
true.
with the anti-Hank nature of creatives.
There need to be more good Hanks. There's Hank McCoy, the blue-eyed bouncing beast.
That's true. But even Hank Pym, his name is Hank, and he beats his wife.
What about Hank from Breaking Bad? He ended good.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying everybody named Hank, but when writers, particularly in a certain era, were creating horrible men who beat up their wives, they were almost always named Hank. And I feel like I want to jump in. I wish that we had arranged this in advance, because I would have loved to have called Nancy Wagner live to have her attest to the fact that her husband is a good and decent man, and people should stop naming such horrible characters Hank. Save Hank. Hashtag save Hank.
We're totally doing that next week when this airs. So anyway, yeah, evil Hank is arguing with Bobby Joe. Good Hank would never do such a thing. And the man thing approaches the house. But before he can, his arch nemesis, who we talked about last week, the alligator, rises up out of the swamp.
And while I was reading this, I was thinking about what you said last week, and I decided that throughout this whole show, for our own sake, I think we need to assume that this is the same gator over and over and over again. Like, yes. It's like Ralph and Sam, the sheepdog and the wolf in Looney Tunes.
Right.
The man thing and this gator. And he needs it. You know what? The gator's name is Hank.
Okay. Hank the gator.
Hank the gator. So, and look, I've just done it. I've just done what I accused myself of I accused others of doing.
Not all Hanks, Chris. Not all
Hanks. But look, all right. So Hank the gator, from now on, we're gonna assume that it's like clockwork, that the gator who continually assaults the man thing is the same gator every time, like Captain Hook and the crocodile.
All right. We then remember, Chris is reading these in collected form. I'm reading the original floppies. We then turn the page and we get to the Marvel bullpen bulletins for that month. Of course, we have Stan Lee's soapbox. As we know from his appearances on this show, we know that Scott Edelman often wrote a number of the other news items in those bullpen bulletins. He did not write Stan Lee's soapbox. Let's make that very clear. Stan wrote those. But at the bottom of that page, Chris, we actually see an ad for the very comic book we're reading right now, Man-Thing, who debuted that month along with Doc Savage. Marvel had the rights to the character at the time. Journey into Mystery, which they were relaunching, and the Gunhawks. Now, I don't remember the Gunhawks.
Wasn't the Gunhawks a team-up book?
It was. It was, judging
it Two
by
Gun
the
Kid and Rawhide Kid together or something like that?
No, I don't recognize either of the cowboys. It's a white cowboy and a black cowboy.
I don't remember that.
So that's all I know about it. I have no frame of reference for the Gunhawks.
Huh. Well, we'll have to dig that up.
We will. But yeah, the Hank, not Hank the Gator, but Hank the human, hears the noise outside. He wonders what's going on. And he says he's going to go outside and pump a few shotgun rounds into one of them.
Now, I note that Hank is drunk, and he grabs his shotgun or his rifle, and he's drinking, continues to drink from a fairly big flask, it appears, or a pint of some off-the-shelf brand whiskey. But you notice, Brian, that much like our president, he's unable to drink with only one hand. The way that he's lifting the bottle to his lips, clearly he needs to steady it. He doesn't have the strength in his right hand to get that to his lips. He's impaired in some way. So yeah, I mean, we could probably safely cut to the chase in this one, right? I mean,
yeah, Hank encounters the man thing, and he knows fear, and of course, whatever knows fear burns at the man thing's touch.
Yeah.
But there's a good sense of EC Comics irony here, because the thing readers probably found most repugnant about Hank was his mouth. We didn't get into a lot of the dialogue here, but he says some horrible things to Billy Joe. And what the man thing does is burns his fucking mouth shut. He fuses his lips together.
Yeah. I mean, and weirdly, I can think of so many people who should have a visit from the man thing.
I want this power.
Well, in any case, Bobby Joe is very relieved in some ways. She's glad the man thing then leaves Hank, and now she's going to take care of him, which is kind of a shame. I wish that the man thing had just burned him to a cinder. But, he knows the man thing knows only a feeling of emptiness, of loneliness, for he is, or so we are told, a foul, unthinking man thing. And weirdly, I think Hank, human Hank, is really the foul, unthinking man thing.
I agree. But not Hank Wagner, who listens to the show regularly. We love you, Hank.
Correct. And not Hank the Gator.
Right. And not Hank the Gator.
Yeah.
So we then transition to Adventure into Fear, issue number 11.
Subtitled Night of the Nether Spawn.
That's right. We're going to introduce one of the Man Thing's major Rogues Gallery members with this issue. Completely different creative team. The amazing Steve Gerber is writing, and the equally amazing Rich Buckler is doing pencils. I know we've talked about them both on this show, but when I go back to 70s Marvel, those are probably my two favorite creators right there every time. I mean, much love for Gerry Conway, much love for Scott, Roy Thomas, etc. But when I think of the 70s comics that little Brian enjoyed the most, Buckler and Gerber always seem to be involved with them in one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I know that this series gets wilder, but I actually really do like these two issues, the next two issues, 11 and 12 here. I love the fact that they do have this EC Comics feel to them.
Yes.
Because it gets crazy with sorcerers and the nexus of all realities and all that stuff, which is great. But these feel like just like classics ripped out of the EC era. And you're right. The very first issue that Gerber writes introduces a character who still remains relevant in Marvel Comics today. I mean, appears occasionally, who's Jennifer Kale.
Oh, I see. Jennifer appears in this issue. I was thinking about the Nether Spawn himself.
Oh, okay.
Who we've seen in Defenders during our run on J.M. DeMatteis's Six-Fingered Hand run.
I gotcha.
But yes, Jennifer Kale as well. Let's talk about that. We open with the Man-Thing observing two teenagers in the swamp. One of them, a blonde girl, is drawing a mystical pentagram in the dirt. She has a spell book open in front of her, and she's got candles and incense. And she's with her little brother. Her name is Jennifer Kale. Her little brother is Andy Kale. They will, in fact, be part of the supporting cast going forward. And as you may have guessed it, they both know a little bit about magic and sorcery.
Yes. So Jennifer has stolen this book from, is it their grandfather or their father?
Their grandfather.
She wanted to, read up about witchcraft from the grandpa's library, but he wouldn't loan them the books or loan her the books. And she believes that there's something about this book that her grandfather didn't want her to know. It's part of our family heritage, she says. And basically she decides, okay, well, she can't get help from her grandpa. And he's either keeping the knowledge to himself, or he's trying to protect them from the results of it. But like a classic issue of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina or something, she has created a pentagram or magic circle. I can't tell. And they're trying to summon a demon. She's trying to summon a demon.
Yep. And what I find interesting about this, Gerber actually uses some real occultism here in the detail. One candle each for north, south, east, and west, and one inside the circle near me. Like, it's not just your typical Bronze Age comic book occult trappings. Like, he worked some real shit into this.
Right.
In a comic book meant for kids.
Right. Don't try this at home, kiddies. It reminds me how in the 80s, when they released that paperback version of the Necronomicon.
Oh, yes, the Simon Necronomicon.
Yeah, that from that point forward, I was guilty of it too. Dozens, probably hundreds of people writing horror stories ripped bits and pieces of spells from that book, to the point where you could recognize when somebody else did it.
Yep.
Yep. Anyway.
So yeah, Jennifer tries the spell and she thinks it doesn't work. But we see a hole open up in the sky above her, like a gateway, pulsing and throbbing from within, yawning ever wider. Jennifer and Andy don't notice it, but the Man-Thing does.
Yep. And they realize, or they think, that it hasn't worked, that nothing has happened, and they're going to go off to see a movie theater because they, unlike you, are seeking air conditioning. And so the candles go out, and a dragonfly flies through the smoke coming from the candles, the smoke that has gone through that strange portal that's burning in the sky. And some influence, some demonic influence, alters that dragonfly, Brian. It inhabits and alters that dragonfly and begins to grow into a demonic version.
That's right. Now, this is his first appearance in Marvel Comics. However, our listeners will know this entity as Thog the Netherspawn. Last seen, as I said, when we covered J.M. DeMatteis's Six-Fingered Hand storyline from the Defenders. We will find out much, much later during that Defenders run that Thog is, in fact, one of the many manifestations of Satan. But that's not touched upon here, nor does the Man-Thing obviously know that. But Thog goes flying off into the night, following Jennifer and Andy. And, of course, the Man-Thing follows it.
Yeah, so Jennifer and Andy gone to see a movie theater called Monsters from Beyond, which is playing at their local Roxy. And they go sit in the theater, and much like, what is the name of the, is it Demons 2? There's some,
Night of the
some
Demons.
Italian horror film.
Yeah, Night of the Demons.
Night of the Demons, where they're watching the movie and then with the demons or with the and then they come crash.
It's wonderfully terrible, but that's a staple.
Half the movies I watch with Daniel.
Yeah, that's a staple here at Castle Keene San Giovanni.
Well, in any case, they're watching the movie with horrible monsters on it, and then the nether spawn bursts through both the wall and the screen. And one of the patrons yells, "Holy cow, 3D, far out!"
But Jennifer, of course, knows that it's not 3D. She knows that it's come for her. And the Man-Thing approaches the theater, goes through the hole in the wall created by the nether spawn, and inside we see Thog, the nether spawn, just killing movie patrons.
Exactly. We should say that Gerber in captions says, "Never since your strange metamorphosis have you strayed so far from the swamp. Never since then have you dared to walk among men." And we'll get to that momentarily. We'll get back to that momentarily. But yes, we see the battle. We see the Man-Thing grab the giant dragonfly version of Thog by the tail and begin flailing around with it and smashing things, which I loved.
Yep.
And then, of course, even the nether spawn knows fear, Brian.
That's right. And whatever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch.
Mm-hmm. Becomes a pile of ash.
That's right.
From which the actual Thog, the nether spawn, rises from those ashes, and much more of a satanic-looking figure now.
Yes, absolutely. Looks like he did in the pages of the Defenders. And he tells the Man-Thing, "Know this, you grotesquerie. I came not of my own choosing. I was summoned. And like she who called me forth from the abyss, you too shall feel my power." So Thog, ostensibly, is in the right. He's down there chilling in Marvel's version of hell, and Jennifer calls him. It's like when I'm sitting here chilling, playing Xbox, and somebody calls me and says, "The genre is on fire, you have to go fix it." I empathize with Thog here. I have sympathy for this devil, Chris.
But strangely enough, Brian, when somebody calls you and says, "Come fix the genre," the result is usually quite similar to what Thog's fixing of things is. Because, okay, so the Man-Thing now, getting back to what we mentioned before, is now weakened, and he realizes for the very first time, he understands instinctively that it's his distance from the swamp. It's like Namor being out of water.
Exactly.
His distance from the swamp is weakening him, and he has to go back. But Thog, he's the Man-Thing begins to trudge back toward the swamp, but Thog wants to kill him now. He's out for vengeance.
Yep.
Andy realizes and points out to Jennifer that they need to reverse the spell somehow. And Jennifer realizes that instead they won't be able to necessarily reverse it. She doesn't know how to do that, but the book is the key. So they have to go back to where it all began.
Right. So we see the Man-Thing retreating back to the swamp, Thog pursuing him, and Jennifer and Andy pursuing them. And, Man-Thing's getting weaker, ever weaker, Gerber tells us, each bolt taking its toll until at the edge of the swamp, he falls face first into the muck that birthed him, and it gives him life.
Right. So Thog thinks he's killed the Man-Thing, but of course, then the Man-Thing, much like Thog did from the ashes moments ago, rises again from the swamp, anew, refreshed, to strike back. And I love this. He's just like, "I'm done with this." He rips a tree out of the ground and uses it as a battering ram to smash it into Thog.
That's right. While that's going on, Andy finds their grandpa's book. He has some matches. He lights the spell book on fire, and Thog, narrates to the reader that his power is consumed with the paper. Soon the gateway will reopen. Man-Thing seizes him, and Thog, knowing fear, he begins to burn again, and he is pulled back through the gateway.
Jennifer and Andy apologize for the Man-Thing. Our foolishness almost cost your life, Jennifer says, yet you saved ours. So they tell him he's got to go. The people from the town and the police are coming, but we'll see you again, maybe even introduce you to our grandpa. You understand some emotions, Man-Thing, like fear and loathing. What about love? So does he have friends now?
Well,
Brian, speaking of friends, I think you have an ad for us.
I do. Before we get to this week's sponsor, however, I want to point out the bullpen bulletins page for this issue has a house ad that tells us Frankenstein is alive and well and coming soon to Marvel.
And, we may never cover it on this show. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. But honestly, if you have not read Marvel's Monster of Frankenstein, there is a complete collection out there, complete color collection of Marvel's Monster of Frankenstein series. It only lasted about 20 issues, I think.
Right.
It is fantastic. I mean, it's a great horror comic. It's a great take on Frankenstein. I can't recommend it highly enough. So add that to your list.
All right. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsor. When we come back, Adventure into Fear number 12. For those of you out there who say, I don't want politics and social justice issues in my comics, you're going to want to turn it off now. And we're going to talk about this one a lot because this is not only one of the first comic books I ever read, it was my first introduction to this character and this series.
Signals. The new supernatural thriller from F. Paul Wilson. Twilight has come. Night will follow. It'll begin in the heavens and end in the earth. But before that, the rules will be broken. The change is coming, and the world as we know it is ending. 16-year-old Ellie has changed. She looks the same, but her mother detects someone else looking out through her blue eyes. Ellie builds a shelter in her room with an entrance that leads elsewhere. On one of the convoy of tractor-trailers, Harry Tate watches drive up a mountain road and return without the trailers, leaving nothing on the mountain. What are they shipping? And the writer, who finds a hole in the floor of his New York City apartment and tumbles through into elsewhere. They will all find each other and find their answers in the electromagnetic pulses piercing the earth from out there. Pulses that no one should hear, but some do. But they are not simply pulses. They are signals. Publishers Weekly says, with this chilling standalone prequel to Night World, F. Paul Wilson draws readers into the eerie universe of the adversary cycle. New readers and series fans alike will be swept away by this supernatural thriller. F. Paul Wilson's Signals, on sale now.
Okay, and we're back. We thank F. Paul Wilson, Crossroads Press, again. Signals, I have read it. If you haven't read it, you need to fix that right now. We continue with Adventure into Fear, issue number 12. Creative team this time. Gerber's still writing. Buckler is now doing the inks, and Jim Starlin, creator of Thanos, is doing the pencils.
Thanos, Warlock.
Yep.
Yeah. The legendary Jim Starlin, whose novel, Among Madmen,
one of my favorites,
is a great novel. It's very much influenced by I Am Legend and other books of the era. Certainly worth your time if such things appeal. Yes. This issue, Gerber's title is No Choice of Colors. And Brian, I was stunned. Literally stunned. I was reading this last night. I was just like, holy crap. I mean, I did not read this as a kid, but you could publish this comic today as a reaction to what's going on right now.
Absolutely. I want to put the impact this had on me into perspective for listeners. I read this comic book in 4th grade, and I remember every moment. I was sleeping over at a friend's house. We were reading comic books in his room. And this was one I pulled out of his collection. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and I've written about this before. In the 70s, we didn't have people of color in rural Pennsylvania. It's not like I didn't see them. They didn't live here. If they did, then, it was in York City or Harrisburg City. They weren't out in the country. My only exposure to people of color was Gordon on Sesame Street, Luke Cage in the Pages of the Defenders, and a friend of my dad's from Vietnam. And, I would hear my dad and his friend talking. They were, after they got back from Vietnam, they were on riot duty in Detroit and Washington, D.C. And I remember my dad's friend was called an Uncle Tom, and I didn't know what that meant. And I knew not to ask because the men were talking. But I didn't know what any of that meant. So 4th grade, I read this comic. Keep that in mind as we go forward, and then come back and tell me that comics can't have a positive impact on children and readers.
There you go.
So yeah, the man thing, he's in the swamp, and he sees a car driving very fast, pursued by a police car.
Yeah, and again, literally, I'm reading this scene, and I'm just like, now this issue, I will spoil a little bit by saying this doesn't end the way it would end if it were published today.
No.
Because I think Gerber was attempting to seek balance, and this was the 70s and what have you. But the story begins and proceeds as the way that it would if it were written today, because this police officer is chasing. This police officer is Sheriff Corley, and the character, the Wallace Corley.
Yeah,
and sheriff of the nearby town of Topeka.
Yep. And he's chasing a man of color who jumps out of the car and begins to flee. And readers, I'm just going to read the dialogue to you. Okay, but the man's name is Jackson, by the way. But the sheriff says, "Halt, boy." So the very first line of dialogue
from the sheriff.
From the sheriff. "Halt, boy." 4th grade, I'm reading this, and I don't understand the connotations from that phrase, but the way it's lettered, the way Starlin draws the art, immediately I'm like, this police officer is not a good person.
Right.
And
then he says, "I don't want to have to shoot you, Jackson." Not much. And that "not much" is actually a separate word balloon, so that it's emphasized. Give yourself up, and maybe there'll be some mercy for you.
Right.
Then Jackson is fleeing. And what does the sheriff do, Brian? He begins to shoot at Jackson as he is fleeing. Jackson is unarmed and running away, and the sheriff is shooting at his back.
That's
he does,
right.
in fact, wing Jackson.
That's right. The bullets pass harmlessly through the ooze that is the man thing. But Steve Gerber tells us the steel-jacketed pellets rip into flesh and bone, and their impact can send a man flying. And that's exactly what happens to Jackson. He's hit, and he goes flying into the water. He climbs out, injured, bleeding, but defiant.
Yeah. Then he says, the cop says, "I think I'll help me a look around here, this here swamp, to see if he's dead. 'Cause if he ain't, I got me a job to do." Again, I'm reading this and I'm just thinking this literally could be today.
Yep. We then get an important panel here. Keep in mind, up until this point, the man thing has only had a handful of appearances. And, writers are still figuring out what he can do, what his power set is, what drives him, etc. The hatred the cop feels for this man of color, Jackson. Gerber tells us hatred, perhaps the most primal of all emotions, certainly the most violent, and therefore the easiest for the man thing to understand. What we're getting at here is that the man thing, the creature itself is an empath. It reacts to human emotions.
And then it continues to say, and he feels something else as well, a kind of primitive empathy for the hated one. So he feels the hatred of the cop, which creates in him an empathy for the person who's the object of that hatred.
Right.
Which again, we should all be more like the man thing, Brian.
Exactly. So he finds Jackson, who's unconscious. He has a bit of Ted Salas's memory, enough to tear Jackson's shirt and make a makeshift cast out of it, or sling out of it. And Jackson wakes up and he says he's not afraid. He thinks maybe he's dreaming, but he realizes he's not, and he realizes that the man thing has saved his life. And he begins talking to the man thing.
And actually he has empathy for the man thing because he's observing him and says, "Can you even hear me? I can see you got eyes. Where's your ears? We're not talking, huh? Reckon that's because you ain't got a mouth neither. In fact, fella, you ain't got much of nothing going for you. In a way, that makes you and me a lot alike."
Yep.
And then we get a flashback, Brian, in which we learn his version, the version he's willing to share of how he came to be in this situation.
That's right. He grew up very poor. He says he grew up in a lousy one-room shack, dirty all the time, because my mama was too busy cleaning white folks' houses to look after ours. Of course, mama was lucky. Papa couldn't get a job at all. Them fine, solid citizens of Topeka, they saw to that. And then we see a flashback with the sheriff. And he's in the home, and he says, we're trying to be fair with you all. Long as you people don't do no marching and carrying on, things will be nice and peaceful. Again, I don't even know that you could have this in a comic book today.
I mean, I would like to think you could.
I would like to think you could, but
Jackson's response is, "And we'll stay nice and poor," right? In other words, as long as we don't protest and don't march and don't carry on, things will stay just as they are, which is how the white cop wants it.
That's right.
Keep people in their place.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out Jackson, he's lonely in this town. He wants someone to talk to. And he makes friends with a girl who wasn't his own kind. And Starlin's art accompanies that. We see Jackson befriending a white girl. And, he says she just wanted someone to talk to as well. But Sheriff Wallace Corley has eyes for that girl. And when she turns him down, Corley blames Jackson, frames him on a trumped up burglary charge, comes at Jackson with a gun. And
he sent his deputy.
Sends his deputy.
Sent his deputy to go after Jackson with a gun. And Jackson says he ran.
That's right.
And that's how he ended up here with Corley hunting him. And again, he says, "You got to help me hide, assuming you understood a word I said. But what's a monster going to know about loving and paying the price?" And of course, we see that the man thing is thinking about Ellen, who betrayed him.
That's right. So they head off into the swamp, man thing in the lead, Jackson following. And they're leaving tracks in the mud. And then Sheriff Corley comes across those tracks and vows to continue the hunt. He's going to get Jackson. But before they can, they are attacked not by Hank the alligator, but by Charles, Charles the Snake. We're going to name the snake after Charles Rutledge.
Why does Charles make a continued appearance?
Yeah, Charles does not as often as Hank, but okay. Charles will make it. So yeah, this giant snake attacks Jackson, begins to constrict him, and the Man-Thing grabs the snake, beats it to death. But Jackson's cries alert the sheriff, who finds them.
I feel like once we've gone through this whole thing, we should go into the Wikipedia page for Man-Thing and add Hank the Gator as one of his nemesis, and list all the issues in which Hank the Gator appears. In any case, Sheriff Corley catches up to Jackson and the Man-Thing. We have a splash page showing them facing off. Corley has his gun. But Jackson says to the Man-Thing, "You got to protect me." And Corley says, "Ain't nothing can save you now, Jackson. Not man, not monster, not nothing. You're going to die, boy, right here, right now, like the murdering dog you are."
That's right. Few are the words that have the power to slice through the fog of insanity which clouds the mind of the Man-Thing. But of those few, murder is one. And so the Man-Thing pauses as Corley and Jackson go back and forth. Corley says, "You boys are all the same. A peace officer."
I want to stop you before you read that.
Oh, okay.
Because I want to say again, I want you to focus when you're reading that panel on just how it is like literally you could go on Twitter right now and see a video. I'm sure if you could find a video of a live or moment from this year of someone saying the same thing. But go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is early 70s, but you could do it now. So the sheriff says, "You boys are all the same. A peace officer tries to do his duty and you start yelling brutality. And if that don't work, you kill him." And again, these are the words, apologies to younger listeners. That's when the jungle instinct in you boys really shows itself. When you can stab an innocent man for no reason other than he's better than you. And what Starlin draws in the panel is a dead man and Jackson standing over him with a knife.
Yeah.
And then what does Jackson say?
Jackson says, "You're a liar. I would have come peacefully, but he was sneering, threatening me. I couldn't take no more. He treated me like so much trash." But again, and the racism continues on Corley's end. Wow. I mean, again, I can't overstate. I mean, this comic book was published in the mid 1970s.
Yep.
It is 2020.
And here's the panel that is emblazoned in fourth grade Brian's mind. And the way Starlin constructs it is beautiful. It's two panels and they're split, and between them stands the Man-Thing. But the expression on both Jackson and Corley's faces is identical. Mm-hmm. Jackson is calling Corley a honky, and he's the man that he murdered is a honky, and Corley is calling him boy again, and saying that your kind was never too long on brains, and Gerber says in the panel, "Two men, one black, almost a friend, but he has killed and lied and betrayed the Man-Thing's trust. And one white, wearing the uniform of the law, yet consumed by a lawless lust for the black man's blood, and both afflicted with a cancerous hatred so inhuman as to dwarf the Man-Thing's own inhumanity." Fourth grade, this is how I learned about racism, what it was. I didn't get it from Sesame Street. I didn't get it from my parents. It was this comic book and these 2 pages. And, I can't stress enough how crucial and essential these were for an entire generation of kids when it came to learning about the world around us. Yep. If you wanted to know about heroin, you probably didn't get it at school in the 70s. You probably didn't get it from your parents. You learned it from that issue of Green Arrow and Green Lantern.
Right.
So just amazing stuff. Just amazing stuff here.
Yeah. Yeah, if you wanted to learn about alcoholism in this era, you learned it from Tony Stark.
Exactly. And I may have picked up the wrong letter for those issues of Iron Man, but
well, no, but again, like, your parents my parents didn't talk to me about this stuff. Teachers didn't talk about this stuff much anyway. So as a kid in that era, yeah, you did learn a lot from this comic. But going back to the episode we did a few weeks ago, clearly lots of people didn't learn the lessons reading these comics, even though it can't be clearer. Right. In any case, the Man-Thing makes the... Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, he decides he's had enough of both of their nonsense, and he walks away. He's like, fuck you both, and goes striding off.
But then the result of his abandonment, is that Jackson turns to run toward the Man-Thing to plead with him for help. Sheriff Corley says, "Shut up, black boy, and die," and shoots him 3 times in the back.
Yep.
Jackson falls and dies, and
then Corley expresses over Jackson's dead body. He expresses his desire that he wishes he could take his gun and kill all of Jackson's kind with one shot.
Yeah, he says he wishes Jackson were alive to see the big old smile on my face. It's upsetting to me to even read that.
It is.
In any case, Corley assumed the Man-Thing to be big, stupid, harmless, but a rage begins to swell in the Man-Thing, a seething, snarling rage that hungers for animal justice. I think people know what's going to happen, Brian.
I think they do. I think Sheriff Corley is going to know fear.
And he's going to burn at the Man-Thing's touch.
That's right. Now, there's something on this page that I want to point out.
Unlike the guy in the last issue, though, I should point out that Sheriff Corley burns to death.
That's right. Something I wanted to point out. It's a common motif with Jim Starlin in Warlock and in the Infinity Saga, etc. You would often see skulls reflected in a character's eyes, symbolizing death. This is early Starlin work here.
Oh, yeah.
I suspect this may be the first time he did that, is this issue of Adventure in the Fear.
Interesting.
Because the sheriff sees skulls reflected in the Man-Thing's eyes before the Man-Thing, in fact, burns him to death.
Indeed. That's really cool, because that becomes a common motif for Starlin. Next issue in Man-Thing 13, or Adventure into Fear number 13, Val Merrick takes over for a bit. And that's interesting on art. And we see the story begin to move away from the EC Comics Crime and Punishment, style story, and grow into a crazy, like the kind of crazy shit that Gerber was so well known for. So we'll do at least 13 and 14 next episode, Brian. Maybe 15 as well, but we shall see.
Now, I find something interesting here. There's on the letters page of Adventure into Fear 12. There's a letter from an Anthony Balducci, and I have to wonder if that's the academic and journalist and author Anthony Balducci. I'm gonna research that and find out. I always enjoy looking at the letters pages from that era, because you see letters from people who we know, people our age who grew up to do this for a living, etc. So I'm going to research that and report back next week.
Yeah, sounds good. In fact, if you go, the one and only letter I ever wrote to Marvel Comics was a letter that I wrote. I had started college, I think, and my roommates in my sophomore year of college got me back into reading comics, because I hadn't read them since I was about 13 at that point. And I was frustrated because my favorite comic that I was rereading at that time was Moon Knight, the classic Doug Munch Moon Knight. And So I wrote, to Marvel Comics, and that letter eventually appeared in Marvel Age magazine, in which I said, look, you guys, this is a great character. You need to bring him back, and I'll write it if nobody else will, because it's so, and the response was both good news and bad news, Brian. The response printed was that indeed Moon Knight was coming back, but the result was the short-lived Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu series, which was not good.
So not good.
So be careful what you wish for, right?
That's right. All right, folks. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to this week's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you enjoyed listening to it, just a reminder, a shout out to our engineer, Matt Wilderson. He's the guy that makes us sound good every week. He's got his own podcast called Grindcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to Defenders Dialogue. And Matt, much like Chris and myself, is also an author. If you go to Amazon.com, type Matt Wilderson in the search bar, all of his books will come up. We encourage you to buy one, help him out. You're supporting us by supporting him, quite frankly. So until next time, Chris.
Well, sponsored by Hank the Gator, Brian. Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed. We'll see you next week, folks.
Signals. The new supernatural thriller from F. Paul Wilson. Twilight has come. Night will follow. It'll begin in the heavens and end in the earth. But before that, the rules will be broken. The change is coming, and the world as we know it is ending. 16-year-old Ellie has changed. She looks the same, but her mother detects someone else looking out through her blue eyes. Ellie builds a shelter in her room with an entrance that leads elsewhere. And one of the convoy of tractor-trailers Harry Tate watches drive up a mountain road and return without the trailers, leaving nothing on the mountain. What are they shipping? And the writer, who finds a hole in the floor of his New York City apartment and tumbles through into elsewhere. They will all find each other and find their answers in the electromagnetic pulses piercing the earth from out there. Pulses that no one should hear, but some do. But they are not simply pulses. They are signals. Publishers Weekly says, with this chilling standalone prequel to Night World, F. Paul Wilson draws readers into the eerie universe of the adversary cycle. New readers and series fans alike will be swept away by this supernatural thriller. F. Paul Wilson's Signals, on sale now.
Defenders Dialogue is a production of the Brian Keene Radio Network. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Defenders Dialogue is written and produced by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com. If you enjoyed this show, you might enjoy our other podcasts, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, Cosmic Shenanigans, and Grindcast. To advertise on Defenders Dialogue, visit briankeene.com and click Podcasts.